Hello guys, I am back with another sourdough video. My sourdough loaves have been going flat lately, and I know why. I knew why. It's because I've been trying to cut corners, of course. And we all know that when you're making sourdough, each corner that you cut um, is going to affect the turnout of the loaf. Um, so what I did was I went back to my basics and I had stopped doing the autolyse, and I also was prolonging the amount of time in between the stretching and folding. So I added those two things back into my routine. And so I'm showing you this, I guess, the latest routine that I do for my sourdoughs. Um, so sit back and enjoy as I show you behind the scenes of my sourdough making. Okay, so I start by milling my own wheat. For my bread flours, for my breads, when I'm making my breads, I use spring wheat, hard red spring wheat berries, and I mill those. And I use half of that, and then I use half King Arthur red flour for my breads. And then I'm wiping down all the flour that got all over the place here. Next step is feeding my starter. I start off with the amount of water that is called for in my recipe, and I add my starter that I got from the fridge. I left the starter out overnight from out of the fridge to bring it down to room temperature, and then I mix it and let it sit for about 5 minutes so it can dissolve, and then I mix it again. Next, I add flour to the starter. I feed it with my whole wheat flour that I milled. It's just half of what's called in the recipe, and I mix it and then I add the other half. And I found that it was a little bit too dry, so I added some water. Sometimes I need to add a little bit more water or a little bit more flour depending on the consistency at the time. I like my starter to be, when I feed it, I like it to be more on the thicker side, because I find that when I'm dealing with the fresh milled flours, it helps actually to get a better crumb, more open crumb when I have a thicker starter. I put a rubber band on it and put it in the container. And then my toaster oven actually has a ferment setting on it, so I put it on 80 degrees inside my toaster for 4 hours, my toaster oven. Next step is preparing the autolyse. While the starter is fermenting, I combine the water and the flour that I need for my first batch of breads. So here I'm adding half of the whole wheat flour that I milled, and then half of the King Arthur bread flour. I mix that together. Until all of the flour is absorbed by the water. And then I put my shower cap on top. Those shower caps come in handy. Next step is my second batch of breads. Each batch makes 4 small personal size loaves. So I add my water, my whole wheat flour, and my bread flour. Mix that together again, just like last time. Until all the flour is absorbed again. and then I put my shower cap on top just to make sure it doesn't dry out. And here I am just adding the leftover flour that I milled into my storage container for later use. I'm checking out my starter to see how it's grown. It wasn't quite there, and it had 2 more hours to go. So it was at exactly the spot that I expected it to be after 2 hours. And there it is, more than doubled after 4 hours and ready to go. And you see the bubbles, the fermentation at the top. Next, my autolyse sat for 4 hours. The bread and the water and the flour sat for 4 hours. And now I am adding my starter to this first batch. You see the consistency of my starter. And there's my starter and my first batch of dough. And it's so much easier to mix this together after having let that water and flour sit during that 4 hours while the starter is fermenting. So this is after I mixed the starter and the autolyse and the salt together. I'm trying, I am fighting with the gluten that has formed, which is a good thing, but it was a challenge trying to separate these into 4 different balls of dough, or masses of dough. They're not really balls. Yeah, so I separated these into 4 different masses of dough, and then you see I store mine and I shape them, and I do everything in these Tupperware containers, which is very convenient because they have the lids and they're just the right size for my my smaller loaves. And here is the last of the 4, and then I weigh them just to make sure that they are around the same amount. Level them out and just put the lid on top. And here I am adding my second batch of autolyse to the mixing bowl. And then I add my second batch of starter. And then the remaining starter that I had, the leftover starter, you see it's not that much. I just put that in the same container that I took it out of. And you see it's only, I don't know, maybe 30 grams. Just a little bit. And I keep that in the fridge until the next time I need it. And I usually only use it maybe once a week. I feed it once a week out of the fridge. And it's okay. It's not starving. Here I am mixing the dough again with the starter, the autolyse, and the salt. This is the second batch. I mix my doughs on just the stir setting on the KitchenAid, which on any other mixer would be probably the first setting. So it's not fast at all. And you can see the gluten has definitely developed in this dough. My next step is separating the next 4 loaves from this second batch of dough. Got a little bit better hang of it after doing the first batch, and I am using my counter, I can't remember what it's called, my dough scraper. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And I'm using Tupperware again for this next 4 batches of dough. I love using these Tupperware containers. It's so easy. I know some people stretch and fold their doughs all together and then separate them, but I found that when I do that, it deflates the dough a little bit when I'm cutting it after it's been fermented and stretched and folded for the 4 times that we do it. I found that it deflates the dough. So this is the best way that I found, and easiest way to do it is by separating them and then stretching and folding. So here is the first stretch and fold, and you see how easy it is to handle that dough just because I did the autolyse. I usually stretch and fold maybe between 5 to 6 times. The first time that I do stretch and fold is usually 5 to 6 times, I would say, or more. And the way that I stretch and fold, I dig my hands under the dough, pull it up and over itself, and do that 5 or 6 different times. And then I set the timer for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes has gone by, I do the second set of stretches and folds. I changed over to my workbench because my husband was actually making dinner during that time, so he kicked me out of the kitchen. Not really, I kicked myself out of the kitchen so I wouldn't be in the way. So I went over to my workbench to do this. So that is the first 4, and here I am on the second batch of doughs. And make sure I kind of tuck it in so it doesn't spill over while it's waiting for the half an hour. While it's sitting for the half hour, I make sure it's nice and tucked in. Kind of like a baby, wrapping a baby in a blanket. These are like my babies. I love shaping, stretching and folding the sourdoughs. So here's another 30 minutes has passed by, and I am doing the third stretch and fold. And it's much easier, as you can see. The dough is not losing its shape as much. It's also growing in size. It's not sticking to the Tupperware as much as it was in the beginning, the first stretch and fold. So by the third stretch and fold, the third session of stretching and folding, I usually only do about 4 stretches and folds because the dough, the gluten has really formed and it's harder to stretch the dough. So here's my 4th session, and the dough has grown and is keeping its shape quite well, quite nicely. And there's my son trying to help me out. He wants to help his mom out with stretching and folding, but he had dirty hands, so I couldn't let him. And you see how the dough is keeping its form much better now. This is number 5, I guess. I didn't realize I did five times. But yeah, it's definitely getting harder and harder to stretch by this time. And I can work much faster now because it's not getting stuck to the sides, and it's keeping its shape. And here I am showing you guys the end results. Much better looking than before I changed my routine. So there are the 8 loaves that turned out. And I was very happy with those. So that was my latest, or that is my latest routine. Adding the autolyse back and decreasing the amount of time between my stretches and folds, and that really seemed to help with the quality of my swap. Well, I should say it didn't really change the flavor, but definitely the roundness, because I don't want flat sourdough loaves. Yeah, so I think the autolyse is probably the main thing that helped, because you can tell just how the dough was very easy to be shaped, and it wasn't like that prior to adding the autolyse. I also unfortunately did not have a before and after picture. If you guys want that, I can definitely add some pictures to my next video. Let me know. I also realized that I did not show you the pan or the pots that I bake with. I use these, what are they called? Dutch ovens. So this is a 2-quart Dutch oven, and I have 3 of these. And I also have a 2-quart. It's not cast iron. It's I think it's like enamel or something. But yeah, I use all of these. I bake in all of these. I use parchment paper, as you probably saw in one of my other videos. But yeah, that's what I bake in. And I can give you guys some more videos of how the baking goes, the temperature in the oven and how long I bake them for and things like that, just let me know and I can make some more videos of those. But until then, check out my other videos where I show you behind the scenes of my micro bakery.